And now we are going to end this symposium with a panel discussion. And to start with, we'll discuss within the panel, but then at the end of the panel discussion, I'll also ask for questions from you in the audience. There have been so many things from very sort of basic research to behavior, and also from basic research to possible applications. And there are several things that I think could be interesting to discuss. And the first thing was that I noticed, which is kind of a basic question for this symposium, and that's Darwin, the uselessness of culture, in a way. And I think that several of you have demonstrated that culture is not useless. And when I first was a little bit aware of that was then you had the celebration of Darwin. I don't know if it was 150 years. Nature wrote an article saying that human evolution cannot be understood only through genetics, but you have to take into account human culture, because culture has been a very important part of human evolution, actually. Can we start there? Can you comment on that? You know, can you start, Laurel?
Yeah, no, I think in evolutionary theory in general, complex behaviors like language or music and other parts of culture just haven't been studied that much until recently because they're harder to study. But it absolutely has to be the case that they've enormously affected who we are as people. Yeah.
Is this on? No?
Yeah.
Now it's on. So in relation to the Darwin quote that we put in the talk, that quote was very specifically aimed at music, which is obviously one of the great interests for this group and for this audience. And it's interesting how at that time, and of course Darwin was absolutely brilliant and is really responsible for a change in the way we think about how creatures evolved, how design was implemented, quote unquote, over time. There's no question about the brilliance. What is interesting is that in spite of that brilliance, you can have a little bit of a shut vision in relation to some of the things that have evolved in our culture. And obviously in relation to music, that was the case. And he really didn't think that there was any adaptive role in the presence of music. Now, whether or not it's adaptive in the strong sense of the term is an open question, but the fact that once you appreciate the roots of tones and the way tones affect one's behavior, then you realize that music is something very important as a bridge between general behavior and movement and the language that comes to be verbal language. And in between, there's that thing that is shared in our communication to others. In fact, in our communication, even to other species. It's quite interesting because I was thinking when I was thinking about motherese as I was making those comments, it's not just mothers or fathers or others talking to a baby. You don't talk to the baby in the language that I'm using right now. You talk to the baby in a different language with tones. But so do we when we communicate with other species, like, for example, dogs. People don't talk to their dogs using this kind of language. They actually modulate very often the way they talk. So there's obviously quite a lot of substance there, and it's very important. But there's this statement that became famous at some point with the idea that music is absolutely useless from a point of view of evolution. It is just cheesecake for the soul. Well, I think that that is exactly the point. The fact that it's described as cheesecake for the soul is a great way of describing the fact that it is pleasant, that it is something that you will want to have. Who would not want to have cheesecake? And that it gives something, it gives a reward. So that's the point, is that reward and the pleasantness of it have a role to play in the way we operate. And that harks back to the comment that affect has a very distinctive role to play. And of course, when you talk about cheesecake and positive feelings, you think about the positive side of the ledger, but let's not forget the other side, is that emotions and the respective feelings don't come only in good flavors. They come in very bad ones. And when you think about, for example, one of the characteristics of our social and political moment is anger. Whether you're looking in the United States or in European elections, whether it's Brexit or what's been happening in Holland or France, you have this very vehement expression of anger on the part of the electorate, or part of the electorate. And of course, factually, there are quite a lot of reasons for that anger. They have to do with, for example, wealth inequality, unemployment, quite a lot of different opinions in relation to a number of social issues. But the essence of it is that it's not expressed only at the level of facts, it's expressed in an emotional way, and that emotional way is anger. And it's very interesting because culturally that's extremely important, is one of the sides of this constant affective negotiation and manipulation that is going on, and it very rapidly can lead from anger to actually a display of violence, verbal or otherwise, and can be actually a display of physical violence. It's quite interesting to see that very often those expressions of anger at a factual level become expressions of anger physically. And they give permission, for example, to attacks and to a freedom in the use of language that can be quite disturbing, and which clearly has happened recently in the European community or in the United States. So those different aspects, they're totally embedded in the culture. There's nothing that we do in our cultures that does not have that setting. And of course, we have to transcend that. We have to have facts and knowledge and reason over the facts. But the fact is that the embedding of it as living creatures is an effective one because it is related to our life and to our life regulation. It's so interesting to see, for example, Laurel's results on the children, and how you can have something as simple as the coordinated or non-coordinated kind of movement be a cue that I suspect will have an effective translation quite rapidly.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit to that, and that's with the positive and the negative. So yes, sort of group cohesion and so on can be a very positive force, but it can also be a negative force because there's the in-group and the out-group. And so when you become cohesive with a certain set of people, and infants, as I showed, are learning this, you know, when they're 1 year of age, it also means that you're not friends or not close with other people. And I think that's something that has a deep evolutionary history when we used to function in much smaller groups than we need to now. And music may partly overcome that, but I'm not so sure. My kids are now older, but when they were teenagers, one of them played classical music and the other one played rock music. And they had completely different sets of friends. And a lot of their social group was defined, I think, on friends who were interested in the same kind of music and played the same kind of music and listened to the same kind of music that they did. So I think music is just one thing that helps us to form these social groups, and there's positive aspects, but there's also negative aspects of that whole process.
Okay,
Can I just?
Yeah.
It's very hard to hear Laurel here on stage.
Yeah.
From this side, I cannot hear what she's saying actually very well, but I could hear Antonio very well.
Yeah.
It was different microphones. I don't know if it's possible to have more sound. It's completely different than out there. Sorry, Gunnar, but if we can't hear each other, you know, it's pretty meaningless.
Pretty meaningless. And I forgot what to say. No. I did. No.
Sorry.
Meaningless. No, because you have been talking about certain sort of effects of music. But it has also been claimed that musical training, etc., can have a transfer effect on cognition. How about music and learning cognition, which is a typical human thing? But what's the status today? You have a comment, Frederick? Or somebody else?
Should I? Okay, yeah. Well, we've studied that, and I think one way we have been going about there is to utilize twin designs to try and understand causality better. So if you have a true, the logic is that if you have a true causal relation from training to some outcome, such as cognitive ability, then you would predict that this relation holds true also within identical twin pairs. So the twin who trained more should also have then a better performance on some test of cognition. And well, I have to say my impression is that the case for transfer effects on social abilities and emotional abilities is stronger, I would say, at least than the case for general cognitive ability. Probably there is something going on with verbal ability, and of course language and music share a lot of circuitry and a lot of basic properties. So I think that the most interesting findings I've seen have been in sort of, well, the kind of stuff we've seen today, and which also I think is theoretically attractive, since it, in evolutionary terms, since the sort of probably the strongest hypothesis there, to me at least, is that music has to do with social cohesion. I mean, the rivaling idea would be that it has to do with sexual selection, that music is a way to display fitness. And that idea actually goes back to Darwin, I think. But there, I think the case is much weaker. We have tried to look at that as well in large cohorts, and we don't see any evidence for that, at least in today's populations, that people who have a high musical aptitude are more or less successful in terms of children or sex partners or anything like that.
But can I continue that, because you, Hannah,
can I just
exactly?
Do you want to?
No, I was just going to say that social cohesion, in all likelihood, is merged with affect as well. You know, I doubt very much that we're going to have ever social effects without a component of affect that is underneath. But I think Hannah has some results from a study that addresses your point.
Yeah, we... Two? We have a study going on in collaboration with the LA Phil, Los Angeles Philharmonic, sorry, who has a group of children from less favored area of Los Angeles, the Rampart area. It's just a poor area, mixed area, single mothers, families, non-English speaking at home, etc. And so we are studying children age 6 that start this music project it's based on the El Sistema. And we compare those children to children from the same area that are active in sports but have nothing to do with music, and also with children that have nothing after school. So all children go to the local schools during the morning. The music children have every day in the afternoon music lessons and help with homework. The sports children go and play soccer in a group, of course, and the other children probably watch television and on the streets. The music program is a music program where the children play in a group. It's not individual lessons. And we started studying these children at age 6, and this is a longitudinal study of all the 3 groups. And it's very interesting because now we are on our 4th year, and the music children have several beneficial effects that are directly related to music. They are better at rhythm perception, they are better at pitch perception, and actually both behaviorally and in EEG. The P3 is much better in the distinction between violation and non-violation in the music children than in the control children. But it's also interesting that, for instance, another task that we do among all the behavioral tasks that we have, which is the delayed reward. So the children are given 2 chocolate chips or 2 quarters if they take it now. If they wait for a week, they get 4. There is a very big difference in relation to the delaying of the reward, both for the chocolate and for the money. There's really no difference. And the music, the kids in the music group have a significant distinction from the control group. And what I think is very interesting is that in most of our measurements, the sports group is somewhat in between the control and the music group, which just shows us that our choice of another group activity was the right choice, even if the music kids have a better performance. There is something that comes out of the environment that these kids are in, that they are in a group, they have to learn what the other ones want, they have to adjust their actions to what the other ones are doing, but there is a difference between the music and the sports and the control kids. They are much older than your kids.
No, I think that's a fascinating finding. I just wanted to ask you what you think is going on there in sort of more mechanistic terms with the effect on delayed reward.
I think that it probably is the fact that their worldview and their view about the rest of the group transfers into something that doesn't have anything to do directly with the group, but comes out of this empathy for the rest and the understanding that you have to pay attention to other things.
Oh yeah, could it be that you go into a more pro-social mode where you can sort
Yes.
of higher level of trust, higher level of predictability, higher level of reliance on other
Yes.
people in general? That gives you, yeah.
I think so.
Can I ask you, Mihail? Okay.
I couldn't understand, sorry. Can you translate? Oh, it's for you. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Not for you.
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay. No, I had a question for you, Mihail, actually, and that has to do with the cheesecake. And when I listened to you, I thought about the egg and the hen thing, actually. How about because the ones you interviewed are all experts in sports or in music or something like that. Do you think that flow is a driving thing for becoming an expert? So the ones that experience flow are the ones that become the expert. And does that differ between humans, or is that an individual thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure I get what the question is, but what I think it's interesting. I mean, my interest is in actually the reverse process of how culture is being changed by flow, in the sense of people selecting activities and opportunities that allows them to feel this feeling, and therefore changing the structure of the society. And for instance, our technology is in very interesting way shaped by flow. The fact is, the first automobiles that were in the 19th century were used to race from Paris to Beijing and back, or from Boston to to Los Angeles, New York to Los Angeles, and it was the possibility of going so fast and driving this strange machinery that prompted people to take automobiles seriously in a way. And this is, there are books written on it, so I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's certainly happening again, for instance, with computers, the fact that personal computers were at first designed and marketed for playing games on it. And nobody thought that it had much of other purpose, but because people like the ability to control the computers that they had, they started making their tax returns on the computer, they started to keep other correspondence on the computer, and pretty soon computer literacy and use of personal computers went up, as well as the games that originated the whole thing. So, and it's very intriguing in almost anything from political decisions to technological design decisions, how much it depends on whether the promise of this novelty, it promises to enhance the ability of people to experience flow. And so I think I look at evolution from the other side, not how evolution affects flow, but how flow affects.
I want to close the circle maybe on this first part and go back to Darwin and flow, because we heard from Antonio about the flutes in the 50,000-year-old caves. So music was started early, but evolution doesn't design, it just sort of evolves. Biological system, which of course always find chances of new possibilities, and it looks like culture, was one possibility that opened up, and then it's just flooded the Homo sapiens, basically. But I'm curious about things like motivation, creativity, and let's take flow now, as you are here. There must be some, like there is discussion on consciousness. I mean, how old is the flow concept? How important is that one if you go beyond music? I guess flow must have been planted before music. Flow should be such an enormously useful force to drive the social interaction and development in the correct directions. It's a power for the early leaders to play on.
Yeah, and of course, flow can be had also in non-constructive, non-productive activities. And the important thing is to be able to choose those that are socially and personally beneficial too, because the army is trying to use it to teach people to be better sharpshooters, and they do that. They are actually doing that, and that is also probably works, but not in a positive evolutionary direction. And so I think the responsibility that we have is to make sure that young people can experience flow in activities that are beneficial to them and to society. And that's, I mentioned this earlier to someone, that Plato in the Republic, more than 2,000 years ago, wrote that the most important thing for humans is to teach their children to feel pleasure in the right things. And that was, he called it pleasure, but it is a form of pleasure, but pleasure is also obviously very kind of conservative force biologically, whereas enjoyment or flow is something that pushes you beyond the boundaries, and so from an evolutionary point of view is a more interesting, perhaps, force in some ways. But yeah, it's an old idea. It's been in different ways understood before, and it's just that now we understand it from the perspective of 21st century science, but it's there.
Okay, we have had between what we are now, several hundred to 1,000 people, and some of you, I think, are eager to ask a question. So can we take some questions from the audience? Okay, do you have?
My name is Folke Turesson. I have a question about empathy. This is my personal view, but I want your reflection on it. That leadership, there is much more difficult with leadership today if you have lack of empathy. And we have many leaders in the world, but we have also business leaders, like we have the Dieselgate, for instance, where the people in the company did not dare to go and say to the highest leaders that we have problem with these rules, and so to sign up for it. So my question is, because I see a parallel that if you have lack of empathy on the personal level, you have very difficult to be a leader of today, whether it is in the political life, military life, business life, or if you are a doctor and meeting your patients. So that is my question number one.
Who starts?
Empathy.
How about leaders and empathy? Can empathy be trained?
Can empathy, a question subsequent to yours, can empathy be trained? I guess to a certain extent it can. You know, I'm sure there are some people who probably do not feel empathy naturally, or sympathy, which is somewhat simpler. And some of them might not be trainable, because after all, this is a natural gift. I think the majority of people do have empathy for others and sympathy in general, but this is part of natural human equipment. I don't think it starts for everyone at exactly the same level. There is a threshold beyond which you will have empathy, and some people may have a very high threshold. I'm actually convinced that the idea that some people would be devoid of empathy is probably wrong. I think that even psychopaths have a level of empathy and have a level at which they start feeling. That's exactly what drives some of them to actions that are deviant in relation to accepted behavior, is that they have a very high threshold for them to attain some kind of feeling state, positive or negative. But I think your comment about how leaders present themselves is extremely important. And actually we had several times today, for example, with Csikszentmihalyi, a reference to leadership, and also with Dr. Klein, reference to leadership that is aware of the needs of others. You know, that's the best leadership, whether we're talking about how a laboratory runs or a classroom or a big enterprise. And great leaders have generally been able to transmit that concern for others at different levels. And of course, in a world where you get more and more a distancing from the other, because it's presented through the devices. You know, we all have in our pockets these devices that now are interposed between us and the others. I don't know about Stockholm. I haven't seen enough on this visit, but certainly in most capitals of the world, and probably not just capitals, but any large city, you're constantly running more and more into people who are walking towards you, looking at a device, sometimes biking with that device, sometimes texting and biking, or texting and skateboarding, all at the same time. And so the relationship of people tends to be interposed through the device. And that certainly cannot have great positive effects on one's empathy. It's taking away a lot of the cues, because so many of the cues that we've been talking about have to do with what goes on in the expression in a face, what goes on in the expression of the body, and you're missing a lot of those things when you're converting into text or even into a picture that reduces the communication. Yes, and people sense that very much in leadership, and a lot of the, and of course there is a kind of empathy that can be extremely misused by political leaders, because it can appear like it is there with a great encompassing view of other people, and can serve to lead people into the worst possible direction, and periodically, although not regularly, in a periodic but irregular way, we have descents into that kind of leadership that exploits the worst of us. I think we've had this for several of us in our lifetimes, and we're witnessing it again. You know, we have several expressions of it, and I think we need to be very aware of that in terms of the way emotional signals can help manipulate populations in positive and negative senses, because they're there. The ambiguity is there all the time.
I think there was another question. Yeah, you.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me? My name is Thomas Ekström. So children want to listen to the same song over and over and over and over again, and also watching movies over and over again. So it's easy to see that it has something to do with the reward system. And if you can kind of predict the next thing that's going to happen, you get a reward. And then if you're brought up with certain kinds of culture, music, or something else, that you get kind of imprinted into that. So my question is basically, is this the reason why we are kind of stuck, many of us at least, to certain kinds of music, tonality, harmony, because it's easier for us to anticipate the next tone or the next harmony, and therefore we get like a better reward than if we listen to something completely unknown to us.
Sounds like the music part of this panel.
Yeah, I can give a brief comment. I think that might be part of the reason, but of course there are also huge differences in how intrinsically predictable different kinds of musics are. And of course, I don't think you can deny that certain music is more demanding. It requires more active listening, it requires more knowledge, and will probably always have a smaller audience. I think repetition and experience is one thing, but there are also sort of intrinsic differences that contribute.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I could add that in development, we see very often, if you take a stimulus that has a certain level of complexity, the younger the baby, the more repetition they will enjoy of that. The older they get, the fewer repetitions of it they'll enjoy. So it kind of has to do with, I think, an optimal level of processing, and actually it fits very nicely into the flow idea that you were talking about this morning, where you want to be in that level of skill, which I would say, or understanding, and challenge. And when you're a younger baby and you are less good at processing, you need more repetitions. It will still be interesting. But as you gain skill in perception, then you're going to get bored after fewer repetitions. But in general, the idea of expectation in music is absolutely critical to our emotional responses to music. There's a lot of work that suggests it's one of the major reasons we get enjoyment from music is because we can make predictions, and then when they're violated to a certain degree, that we can still understand and put into our sense of what the music is about, we really enjoy that. If the violations are completely incongruous and way out there, it doesn't make sense to us and we don't really enjoy it. If we're not familiar enough with the musical structure that we can make those predictions, then we're not going to enjoy it as much. So there's this optimal level, and as you said, it has to do with your knowledge of the musical system as well. So people often don't like a certain piece when they first hear it, and then after hearing it repeatedly, they begin to understand it. They become familiar enough with it that they hear what's going on, they hear what the predictions are. And just one other point I'd like to make about prediction is that we have two basic prediction systems. We have a bottom-up prediction system that's automatic, but we also have a top-down, sort of more consciously controlled prediction system. And the bottom-up system operates regardless of your knowledge of a particular piece. So for example, you can listen to a piece of music that you've heard 100 times before. You know what chord is coming next. And if it's a chord that isn't predicted by the structure, you'll still feel the effect of that unpredicted chord, even though you know the piece well enough that you know it's coming. And that's your automatic system operating that you just can't turn off. So we have these two systems, and how they interact is also, I think, very interesting.
Okay, and further comments? I think that you had a comment, but that was to the last thing on emotion. Empathy.
What I was trying to finish up with a few words the previous topic, because music, and unfortunately I'm not very much in tune with music, so I don't know, I love music, but I can't hold the tune, so I don't know about that. But the previous topic was about empathy as a tool for politicians, and I just wanted to say that if I had real good results showing that empathy helps a politician, I would try not to publish it, because if it became known, you would have a lot of people pretending to have empathy who are out to subvert the interest of the population. I remember very clearly an older German lady whom I talked to about politics, and she was saying, oh, you know, this was a few years ago. She said, I was 15 when we went with a group of young women and boys climbing in the Alps, and we were walking down, and we were crossing this little village, which was Berchtesgaden, where Hitler played. And suddenly, these young people were called onto a terrace and told, come on, and offered whatever they wanted, cold drinks or tea and pastries, and they were very surprised. And then a few minutes later, Hitler came out, and he had arranged to get these young people there, and he gave a little speech, and then he asked questions. And this lady who was in her 90s, when I talked to her, she was still so awestruck by how much empathy Hitler had for these young people who were hungry and tired, and she would go to the end believing this, and unfortunately, empathy can be simulated and mimicked in various ways, and if it's a double-edged sword, it's a very good thing to have, but it can also be misused. And,
do we have?
But we also happen to be. Can I get the microphone? We also happen to be very good at detecting bad acting, and when empathy is acted and is not natural, we tend to be pretty good at detecting it. So we can make the separation between what is natural and what is fake, and fortunately for us, very often politicians are terrible actors, and they will not convince us very much. But I think your case is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Time is running fast, but I think I would allow for another question. I think there was somebody, over there. Do you have a microphone?
Shi-Ching, do you have? There was a question also. He already had the microphone. Okay, now he doesn't have it anymore. Yeah.
Can we start with your question? I'll give her the microphone. So we have 2 more questions.
My name is Ulf Henrik Lindberg. It's tempting to look upon the concept of flow as only being a positive thing, as for instance in scientific research and cultural endeavors. But I can also think of it as being non-constructive, even destructive. As for instance, look upon the biggest threat to human civilization right now in those fundamentalistic movements where youngsters go into probably a kind of negative flow. Have you any views on that subject?
Yeah, I'm not by any means saying that flow is good in itself, except for the momentary experience of the person. And that is a good experience, but it can lead to addiction, for instance. It can lead to political extremism. It could lead to enjoying hurting people and in war or in boxing matches. And that's why I think the Greek philosopher was so prescient, that he understood this. He said that we have to teach people what to find pleasure in, And if you find pleasure or flow in things that are in the long term harmful, you are going to have a really bad situation, either personally or socially. And we need to make sure that young people have opportunities to find flow in things that are good for them and that are good for society. And this is a big problem. We are trying to do this in schools. We are trying to do it in community centers and so forth. But that's why, the Finnish schools are one of the best in the world. And in Finland, in the schools, you can't have a child sit in a bench for more than 50 minutes. They have to go out and play for 15 minutes and then come back. And this is, that's one solution. I'm not saying it's the ideal solution, but it's one understanding that you have to introduce enjoyment in the serious part of life. Otherwise, children will go work when they grow up, and then in the free time they will take drugs and do stupid things, to amuse themselves or to enjoy. So that's the short answer.
The final question.
Hi, can you, okay. My question is about flow also. Or actually I have a second question if it's possible. So on flow, is it a consequence of being in concentration of something or doing something in deep concentration? Or can it be, can you create flow? Can you create an environment that will lead you to have flow? If you get what I mean, is it an effect or is it a consequence?
Yeah, I don't think you can teach flow directly. It's always through some other means of action that a child understands or an adult understands and wants to pursue. And then that's why, for instance, in education, I was impressed by the Italian educator Maria Montessori, who developed this whole system that is still quite viable and flourishing. And that's based on creating an environment that's stimulating and interesting and on which the child can learn by interacting. And you know, I was very surprised. The first time I visited a Montessori school, I was in my 60s, and a 6-year-old boy took me to a construction made of sticks. And I said, "What is this for?" And he said, "That's for extracting cube roots." And I never extracted a cube root in my life. But he demonstrated by moving this squares within squares within squares, how actually it's done in a physical way. And he, you know, at 6 years old, learned that because he was using his hands and his imagination in building something, and he learned from it. I mean, that is a way, I'm not saying that that's the only way or the best way, but it is you can create environments that stimulate flow and hope that the people will take the opportunity. But if there is no opportunity, the child will give up usually and do the things that are the most simple and most immediately pleasurable, but doesn't lead to any kind of growth and development. So.
Thank you very much. Time is really running fast, and we have to also listen to a little bit of music, and we have promised to finish by 4:15. I hear the comments, but I think that we have to do this. I'm not going to summarize today's symposium in any way, but I feel encouraged that we sort of go from biochemistry, from microbiology, up to empathy and motivation and flow and creativity. And I can see and foresee that this will gradually narrowing the gap between the two societies. And that we, when we start here at the Karolinska Institute, has to understand that we have to encompass a much sort of greater scientific competences than only medicine. And I hope that we can still be in touch and that you can help us as advisors in the future. And I want to thank you really very much for coming here. It has been a pleasure, and I've heard so many positive comments. So thank you very much. I think we'll give them a big, big hand.